Okay, I want you to try and visualize a Venn diagram with me for a second. Imagine three giant, really distinct circles.
Mm-hmm.
In that first circle, you have the absolute titans of quantum chemistry, the people who redefined the fundamental math of how atoms stick together.
Right. The architects of our modern chemical world.
Exactly. Then, in the second circle, you have the most aggressive, the most dedicated peace activists of the Cold War. We're talking people getting their passports revoked by the U.S. government for shouting about nuclear fallout.
The ones who are considered genuine threats to the establishment.
For sure. And then in the third circle, you have the people who are absolutely convinced that vitamin C is the magical cure for everything from the sniffles to cancer.
It's a very strange set of circles. You'd think those three groups of people would never even meet.
You would think. You'd expect them to be three different people, probably living in three different decades. But they don't just overlap, they all converge on exactly one man.
Linus Pauling.
Linus Pauling. And for our deep dive today, we are unpacking his life. And I have to start with the statistic that it blows my mind every single time I read it. Linus Pauling is the only person in history, the entire history of the human race, to win 2 unshared Nobel Prizes.
And that word unshared is really the heavy lifter there. It's so important. I mean, we've had other multiple winners. Marie Curie is the famous one, obviously.
Of course.
But she shared her physics prize with her husband, Pierre and Henri Becquerel. John Bardeen won 2 in physics, but shared them both. Pauling stands entirely alone on that podium.
Both times.
Both times. He won the 1954 Nobel Prize in chemistry for basically rewriting the book on how atoms bond. And then he wins the 1962 Nobel Peace Prize for his relentless work against nuclear testing alone.
And yet, if you ask the average person on the street today who Linus Pauling is, what do they say?
They might say, oh, isn't he the vitamin C guy?
Right, the vitamin C guy. Or they might not know him at all, which is wild.
And that's really the tragedy and the fascination of his legacy, isn't it? We're talking about a man who is a founder of quantum chemistry and molecular biology, a man who proved that sickle cell anemia was a molecular disease, a concept that didn't even exist before him.
He invented the term.
He did. But he ended his career embroiled in this massive, messy controversy, fighting with the entire medical establishment because he was convinced he had found the secret to longevity in, well, a glass of orange juice.
So our mission for this deep dive is, I think, pretty straightforward. We need to figure out how one single human brain could be so brilliant that it revolutionized 3 different scientific fields, so morally convicted that he literally scared the U.S. government into taking his passport away.
Yeah.
And yet so stubborn that he potentially tarnished his own incredible legacy over vitamins.
It's a study in genius, for sure, but it's also a study in certainty. Pauling was a man who trusted his own intuition above almost anything else. And for most of his life, that intuition was almost supernaturally correct.
But when it was wrong?
When it was wrong, he just couldn't see it. He couldn't let it go.
Okay, well, let's go back to where that intuition was just forming. We're going to Portland, Oregon, right at the turn of the century. Linus Pauling was born in 1901. And looking at the notes here, this wasn't some story of a privileged kid with a private tutor and a massive library.
No, far from it. This was a hard-scrabble upbringing. His father, Herman, was a pharmacist, which, sounds like a pretty stable middle-class profession.
Sure.
But he really struggled financially. The family moved around a lot. And then tragedy strikes. Herman died of a perforated ulcer when Linus was just 9 years old.
9.
Oh.
That's barely old enough to understand what death even means, let alone the financial fallout from it.
Exactly. And that left his mother, Belle, alone with 3 kids and really very little money. And Belle was, she was a complicated figure in his life. She was often sick. She was very stressed. And she really relied on Linus. He became the man of the house before he even hit puberty.
So he's not just worrying about homework. He's worrying about how the family's going to eat.
Absolutely. It was a heavy burden for a young kid.
And the spark for chemistry, it didn't come from a classroom, did it? It wasn't some inspiring teacher.
No, that's right. It was a classic boyhood moment. He was about 13, and a friend of his, a boy named Lloyd Jeffress, invited him over to see his chemistry kit.
The classic kit.
The classic kit. And Jeffress showed him a simple reaction, mixing some substances, watching them bubble or change color, and Pauling was just absolutely entranced. He said later he just wanted to understand this aspect of the world. He saw order and rules in what looked like magic.
It's so interesting that he saw order because to me, chemistry looks like chaos when things are bubbling over and changing colors.
Well, to most of us, it's either magic or just a mess. To Pauling, even at 13, it was a puzzle. He had to know the rules. Why did that turn red? Why did that solid stuff, the precipitate, form? It wasn't enough to just see the effect. He had to know the cause.
And being Pauling, he didn't just want to play with the kit. He wanted to professionalize it immediately. Which brings us to my absolute favorite anecdote from his teenage years, Pullman Laboratories.
Pullman Laboratories, yes. This was Pauling and another friend, Lloyd Simon, trying to be teenage entrepreneurs. They were, 15? And they were basically scavenging for equipment.
That's the best part.
They found an abandoned steel plant and literally hauled these heavy refractory bricks back to a basement so they could build their own furnace.
I just love the hustle. We're 15, but we have a furnace. What was the business plan here?
The plan was to perform butterfat testing for local dairymen. They figured the farmers needed to know the quality of their milk to price it correctly, right?
Sure, makes sense.
And they figured these two whiz kids could run the chemical analysis for a small fee.
Bring us your milk. We're in a basement. You can trust us.
And that was exactly the problem. The business failed. I mean, it failed spectacularly because the local dairymen looked at these two teenage boys and said, I am not trusting my livelihood to a couple of kids playing in a cellar.
They didn't get a single customer.
Not one. But it shows you something fundamental about Pauling. He always wanted to apply science. He wasn't just interested in the theory. He wanted to do things with it.
Speaking of things he didn't do, he didn't technically graduate from high school, did he?
No, he didn't. And this is just a perfect testament to his stubbornness, even as a teenager. He was brilliant, obviously. By age 15, he had more than enough credits to enter Oregon State University, which was then called Oregon Agricultural College. But he was missing two specific required courses in American history to get his high school diploma.
Just a little bureaucratic hurdle.
A tiny one. He went to the principal and asked if he could just take them concurrently with his college work or maybe test out. And the principal just said no. Rules are rules, Linus.
So Pauling just said, okay, see ya.
Pretty much. He just walked away without the diploma. He figured correctly that the college degree mattered a whole lot more.
And the punchline is just perfect.
The punchline is that the high school finally awarded him that diploma, 45 years later.
After he had 2 Nobel Prizes sitting on his mantle.
Okay, fine, Linus. I guess you pass American history.
Better late than never, I suppose. But that college period was incredibly intense. He wasn't just studying. He was working constantly to support himself and his mother.
Right. He had all those jobs.
He was a grocery clerk, an apprentice machinist, chopping wood, just anything he could do for a wage. Then, by his junior year, the chemistry department actually faced a staffing shortage. So they looked around, saw Pauling, this teenager who had just completely crushed the quantitative analysis course, and they hired him to teach it.
Wait, he was an undergraduate teaching other undergraduates?
He was, and by all accounts, he was a pretty tough teacher, too.
Yeah.
But that teaching gig led to a very, very important meeting in his life.
It did. He was teaching a chemistry class that was specifically for home economics majors. Right. And into that class walks a student named Ava Helen Miller. They met in the lab, and apparently the connection was just intellectual and instant. She would become his wife, of course, but she was so much more than that. She really became his conscience.
Mm-hmm.
We often sideline the spouses in these great man histories, but with Pauling, you really can't. We'll see later that his political awakening, the thing that won him the Peace Prize, that was almost entirely driven by Ava Helen's influence.
Okay, so he graduates, he gets his PhD from Caltech, a place he'll be associated with forever, and then he does what all the cool scientists were doing in the 1920s. He goes to Europe.
The European tour. This is such a crucial piece of context. If you were a physicist or a chemist in the 1920s, the United States was, frankly, a scientific backwater. Europe was the absolute center of the universe.
That's where all the action was.
All of it. You had Niels Bohr in Copenhagen, Erwin Schrödinger in Zurich, Arnold Sommerfeld in Munich. These guys were literally building quantum mechanics from the ground up, the physics of the very small how electrons behave.
But Pauling wasn't a physicist, strictly speaking. He was a chemist.
And that right there, that is his superpower. He goes to Europe on a Guggenheim Fellowship. He rubs shoulders with these titans of physics, and he has this massive aha moment.
Which was?
He realizes he can take this high-level, incredibly complex quantum physics, which was mostly just abstract equations on a blackboard at that point, and he can apply it directly to chemistry. He can use physics to finally explain how atoms stick together.
Which brings us to Section 2, the architect of matter. He comes back to the U.S., and basically writes the Bible of modern chemistry.
It's not an exaggeration to call it the Bible. He publishes a textbook called The Nature of the Chemical Bond. It has been cited over 16,000 times.
Right.
For decades, if you learn chemistry, you learned it through Pauling's framework.
So let's try to unpack a few of the big concepts he introduced here, because these are things that are still taught in every high school today. Let's start with hybridization. This sounds like something out of science fiction, but it's fundamental, right?
It is absolutely fundamental. Let's try to break it down simply. Before Pauling, chemists knew that carbon, for example, formed 4 bonds. They knew this from experiments. Think of a carbon atom as a little connector toy that needs to have 4 slots to plug other atoms into.
Okay, 4 slots.
But when the physicists looked at the new quantum mechanics of a carbon atom, the slots, the technical term is electron orbitals, they didn't look right. The math didn't match the reality.
They weren't pointing in the right directions.
Exactly. The math said carbon should have a couple of orbitals pointing one way and maybe another one pointing a different way. It didn't match the known reality of a molecule like methane, which is a perfect pyramid shape, a tetrahedron. The map just didn't fit the territory.
So the physics theory and the chemistry reality were in conflict.
They were. And Pauling, using his incredible intuition, said, wait a minute, the atom doesn't keep its orbitals separate. He proposed that the orbitals mix together, they hybridize, to form brand new shapes.
Baking.
That's a great analogy. You have flour and eggs. Separately, they are distinct things, but if you mix them, you get batter, something totally new that acts differently. Pauling said the atom mixes its internal energy states, its s and p orbitals, to create 4 identical sp3 orbitals that point perfectly to the corners of a pyramid.
And suddenly the math matched the geometry.
It was a masterstroke. It was this beautiful bridge between abstract physics and tangible chemistry. It explained why molecules have the specific shapes they do, which in turn explains everything about how they function.
Incredible. And then there's resonance. This is the benzene thing, right? I have these vague memories of drawing hexagons in high school chemistry.
Yes, the dreaded benzene ring. Benzene is a ring of 6 carbon atoms. For years, chemists were confused because it seemed to have alternating single and double bonds.
Okay.
But in the lab, all the bonds acted exactly the same. They were all the same length, same strength. So they came up with this idea that maybe the molecule was flipping back and forth really, really fast between 2 different structures, like a strobe light.
So they thought it was vibrating between 2 states.
Right. And Pauling came along and said, no. He used quantum mechanics to show it wasn't flipping at all. It was a stable blend, a superposition of both structures at the exact same time.
A blend.
He used a great analogy later in life. He said, consider a mule. A mule is the offspring of a horse and a donkey. But a mule isn't a horse one second and a donkey the next. It doesn't flip back and forth.
Right. It's a mule.
It's a mule. It is a stable combination of both. And that's what he called resonance. It explained why benzene is so incredibly stable.
That makes so much sense. And finally, on this topic, electronegativity. I definitely remember this from school. The Pauling scale.
The Pauling scale. It's so simple and so powerful. It's just a measure of how greedy an atom is for electrons in a bond. Fluorine is super greedy. It has a high number. Sodium is very generous. It has a low number.
And this lets you predict what kind of bond will form.
Precisely. It allowed chemists to predict, just by looking at the numbers. Will these 2 atoms share their electrons nicely, making a covalent bond? Or will one atom just steal the electron from the other, making an ionic bond? He gave chemistry a predictive tool it had never had before.
So he's on top of the world, he's young, he's brilliant, he's at Caltech, and he strikes up this friendship with another towering genius, Robert Oppenheimer.
The father of the atomic bomb. Yes, they were very close for a while. Oppenheimer was the ultimate theoretical physicist. Pauling was the ultimate structural chemist. They complemented each other perfectly.
I read that Oppenheimer even gave Pauling a gift.
He did. A stunning collection of minerals. Pauling loved crystals, their perfect geometry. They had this grand plan to collaborate. Oppenheimer would handle the heavy, abstract math, and Pauling would handle the chemical interpretation. It could have been the greatest scientific duo of the century.
But it fell apart. And it fell apart over something. Well, something very personal.
It gets messy here. Oppenheimer was a notoriously complex character, arrogant, brilliant, and sometimes he really crossed boundaries. Apparently, he arrived at Pauling's home one day when Linus was at work and, well, he essentially propositioned Ava Helen.
He just straight up asked her to run away with him?
He invited her to join him for a romantic tryst in Mexico.
Wow. That's a bold move to make with your best friend's wife.
A very bold and a very, very bad move. Ava Helen, of course, refused. She told Linus about it, and that was it. The friendship was over. The collaboration was dead.
And you have to wonder, that's a massive what if. If they had stayed close, would Pauling have been drawn into the Manhattan Project?
It's a huge question. Later, Oppenheimer was desperate for a head of the chemistry division at Los Alamos. He asked Pauling. Pauling refused, citing his pacifist beliefs and his health. But if they were still best friends, who knows? History could have gone down a very different path.
If Pauling goes to Los Alamos, maybe he never becomes the peace activist.
Yeah.
The whole second half of his life changes. But he moves on. He's conquered the mineral world. He's conquered the chemical bond. So naturally, he gets bored and decides to solve biology.
This is what makes him so special. He just didn't see the boundaries between disciplines. He looked at biological things, proteins, hemoglobin, hair, muscle, and he didn't see life stuff. He saw molecules. He saw geometry. He was absolutely convinced that the exact same rules that held a rock together also held a person together.
And in 1951, he drops another bombshell. The alpha helix.
This was the holy grail of biology at the time. What is the structure of a protein? Everyone knew proteins were these long chains of amino acids, like beads on a string.
Yep.
But in the body, they aren't floppy strings. They fold up into these very specific, rigid shapes to do their jobs. But how? What was the shape?
And how did he figure it out? I read something about him using paper models.
It's a great story. He was actually sick in bed, maybe with a cold, and he was just bored. He started sketching the chemical structures of the amino acids on a piece of paper. Then he cut them out and started folding the paper, trying to see how the atoms would fit together without bumping into each other.
So he's just playing with paper cutouts.
That's it. And he realized that if you twisted the chain into a spiral, a helix at just the right angle, the hydrogen atoms from one part of the chain would line up perfectly to form bonds with another part of the chain. These hydrogen bonds would act like little staples holding the spiral in place.
He literally folded his way to the answer.
He did. He beat the entire British establishment. He beat the biologists, all from his sickbed. He showed that the structure of life was held together by these weak hydrogen bonds, something he understood better than anyone. This just opened the door to understanding how enzymes work, how our bodies function at a molecular level.
And he didn't just stop at structure. He went on to identify the cause of sickle cell anemia.
This, to me, is maybe his most underrated contribution. It's so profound. Before Pauling, diseases were seen as issues with organs or tissues. You have bad blood. Pauling and his team looked at the hemoglobin molecule in sickle cell patients and proved that it was electrically different from normal hemoglobin. It had a different charge.
So it wasn't bad blood, it was a bad molecule.
Exactly. He coined the term molecular disease. He shifted the entire paradigm from the level of the organ to the level of the molecule. It effectively launched the field of molecular genetics. If you can trace a disease to a specific molecule, and molecules are built by genetic instructions, you can eventually trace that disease all the way back to a single gene.
But, nobody wins them all. And here's where we hit the big one, the DNA blunder.
Yeah.
Because Pauling was so good at proteins, everyone, including Pauling himself, expected him to be the one to solve DNA.
He tried. The race was on. It was Pauling in California versus Watson and Crick in England. Pauling published a paper proposing a structure for DNA, but he got it spectacularly wrong.
How wrong are we talking?
Embarrassingly wrong. First, he proposed a triple helix 3 strands, not 2. And worse, from a chemistry perspective, he put the phosphate groups in the middle of the helix, like a central spine.
And why is that a mistake?
Well, phosphate groups are all negatively charged. If you pack a bunch of negative charges all together in the center, they would repel each other so strongly, like pushing the same ends of 2 magnets together. The whole thing would just explode. It was a basic chemical error.
How does the man who wrote The Nature of the Chemical Bond make a rookie mistake like that?
A combination of things. Hubris, perhaps. He was in a hurry, racing against the guys in England. But there's also a really important political angle here.
Wow.
Pauling was working with pretty poor X-ray data. The really good, clear images of DNA were in England, taken by Rosalind Franklin. Pauling wanted to go to a conference in England where he almost certainly would have seen that data.
But he couldn't go.
He couldn't go because the U.S. State Department had revoked his passport.
Because of his politics. We're starting to get into the next phase of his life.
Exactly. They suspected him of having communist sympathies because of his peace activism. So he was grounded. He couldn't see the data that Watson and Crick saw. And it's almost universally agreed that if he had seen Rosalind Franklin's famous Photo 51, Linus Pauling would have solved the double helix first.
That is just a heartbreaking sliding doors moment in science. But he took the loss gracefully.
He did. To his great credit, when Watson and Crick published their model, he immediately acknowledged they were right and he was wrong. He called his own triple helix the biggest disappointment in his life, but he didn't fight the truth. He accepted it.
Okay, we need to pivot to that peacemaker title now. You mentioned the passport issue. Pauling wasn't always political, was he? He was a lab rat for the first part of his career.
He was completely apolitical. Before World War II, he was just consumed by his science. But the atomic bomb changed everything for him. He saw science, his beloved, beautiful science, being used to create a weapon that could end civilization.
And his wife, Ava Helen, played a big role here.
A massive role. She was a deeply committed pacifist her whole life. And she basically told him, Linus, you have a voice. You have a Nobel Prize. You are respected. You need to use it.
And he went all in.
He went all in. He joined the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists with Albert Einstein. He went on live television to debate Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb.
That must have been something to see.
Oh, it was. Teller was arguing that nuclear fallout wasn't that big a deal, that it was a manageable risk. And Pauling was on the other side, armed with data, arguing that it was causing cancer and genetic mutations for generations to come.
And then there was the baby tooth survey. This sounds kind of creepy, but it was incredibly effective.
It was a brilliant piece of scientific communication. Pauling supported a study organized by the Committee for Nuclear Information, where they collected baby teeth from children all across North America.
And what did they find in the teeth?
They found strontium-90,
Which is radioactive.
highly radioactive. It's a byproduct of nuclear explosions. And chemically, strontium looks a lot like calcium to our bodies. So when the fallout rained down on the grass, the cows ate the grass, the strontium got into the cow's milk.
And the kids drank the milk.
And their bodies said, oh, calcium, let's use this to build strong bones and teeth.
So Pauling could stand up in front of the world and say, the government is blowing up bombs in the Pacific and the fallout is literally inside your child's mouth right now.
That is visceral. You can't ignore that. You can't dismiss that as some abstract scientific debate. It terrified the public, and rightly so. And it was a major, major factor in turning public opinion against atmospheric testing.
But the government did not like this one bit.
They hated it.
Yeah.
The Senate Internal Security Subcommittee dragged him in for questioning. They demanded he name the scientists who helped him circulate his anti-testing petitions. He refused. They labeled him the #1 scientific name in the communist peace offensive.
And the media piled on too.
Oh, yeah. Life magazine, this is mainstream America, called his 1962 Nobel Peace Prize a weird insult from Norway.
The weird insult.
Ouch. The conservative magazine National Review called him a fellow traveler, which was a polite way of saying he was a communist sympathizer. Pauling actually sued them for libel.
Did he win?
No, he lost. The courts ruled he was a public figure, so the bar for proving libel was incredibly high. He'd have to prove actual malice. So he was being attacked from all sides. But he did not flinch.
And, in the end, he was vindicated.
Complete vindication. In 1963, the Partial Test Ban Treaty went into effect, effectively stopping these dangerous above-ground nuke tests. And on the very day the treaty was signed, the Nobel Committee announced that Linus Pauling had won the Peace Prize.
Wow. Talk about time.
It was a direct message he had won.
So at this point, it's the mid-60s. Pauling is a living legend. 2 Nobels. He's helped stop nuclear testing. He's explained the atom. He could just retire and grow roses, but he doesn't. He pivots again. Vitamins.
And this is where the story gets really complicated and, for a lot of scientists, really difficult. In 1966, he meets a biochemist named Irwin Stone, who introduces him to the idea of high-dose vitamin C.
And Pauling is intrigued.
He's more than intrigued. Stone convinces him that humans have a genetic defect, that we lost the ability to make our own vitamin C millions of years ago, unlike most animals. Pauling starts taking 3 grams a day, which is a massive dose compared to the recommended daily allowance.
He feels great, I assume.
He feels amazing. He later said his constant colds disappear. He felt more energetic, younger. And Pauling, being Pauling, doesn't just think, this is good for me. He decides this is a universal biological truth that everyone is missing.
Right. It can't just be an anecdote. It has to be a law of nature.
Exactly. He coins the term orthomolecular medicine, the idea that you can treat disease just by getting the concentration of natural molecules in the body right, the right molecules in the right amounts.
And he writes Vitamin C in the Common Cold. It becomes a huge bestseller. I'm pretty sure my parents had a copy on the bookshelf.
Everyone's parents did. He single-handedly convinced a huge portion of the Western world to start megadosing vitamin C, but then he went further. He published another book, Cancer and Vitamin C.
And this is where it gets really controversial.
This is where he claimed that taking 10 grams of vitamin C a day could extend the survival time for terminal cancer patients by 4 times, or even cure them.
Yeah, that is a massive life-or-death claim. And the medical establishment must have demanded proof.
It did. The Mayo Clinic, one of the most respected medical institutions in the world, ran double-blind, placebo-controlled trials to test Pauling's claims. And they found nothing. No benefit whatsoever.
Zero.
And they published their results and essentially dismissed Pauling's claims as quackery. But Pauling fought back hard.
What was his argument?
He claimed the Mayo Clinic studies were flawed. He even used words like fraud and deliberate misrepresentation. He pointed out a key difference. The Mayo Clinic gave their patients the vitamin C orally, in pills. His original protocol, with his colleague Ewan Cameron, started with 10 days of intravenous IV vitamin C.
And does that make a difference? 5E versus a pill?
It's nuanced. And this is the tricky part. Modern research actually suggests he might have been onto something with the IV delivery. You can achieve much, much higher concentrations of vitamin C in the blood with an IV.
Okay.
And at those super high concentrations, it can act as a pro-oxidant, creating hydrogen peroxide that can selectively kill cancer cells. It's still being studied today as a complementary therapy.
But the cure-all claims he was making, the idea that it would replace chemotherapy or cure the common cold completely?
That hasn't held up. The evidence just isn't there for those broad claims. But he never, ever backed down.
He never did.
Never. Until the day he died, he was promoting megavitamins. It created this very confusing legacy. To the chemists, he was a god. To the peace movement, he was a hero. And to many in the medical establishment, he was a cautionary tale of a brilliant genius who went off the rails in his later years.
It seems like that certainty we talked about at the beginning really was a double-edged sword.
It absolutely was. If you look at the triple helix failure, he admitted he was wrong almost immediately because the chemistry was undeniably, provably wrong. But with vitamin C, because the data was messier and the opposition from the Mayo Clinic felt personal, he just dug in. He couldn't accept that his powerful intuition might have failed him on this one.
Before we wrap up, we have to touch on the human side of this guy. Because he sounds like this abstract computer brain, but he was a quirky, complicated human. Tell me about the cliff incident.
The cliff incident, this is so bizarre. This was in 1960, so he's almost 60 years old. He's at his cabin in Big Sur, a beautiful but rugged part of the California coast, and he decides to go for a walk. And he gets himself stuck on a cliff ledge 300 feet above the crashing ocean.
Just stuck.
Completely stuck. The shale was crumbling away beneath him. He couldn't go up. He couldn't go down. He spent the entire night there, in the dark, clinging to the rock, just waiting for rescue.
That's terrifying.
He was found the next day after about 24 hours. It's just this incredible moment of extreme vulnerability for a man who seemed intellectually invincible. At the end of the day, he was just a man stuck on a rock, cold and scared, and waiting for help.
And then there's a darker side, or at least a more troubling side. We saw in the source material something about eugenics. We need to unpack that because it feels so shocking, especially coming from a great peace activist.
Yes, this is uncomfortable, but it's really important to address. Pauling suggested, in a very clinical, logical way, that carriers of what he called defective genes, like the gene for sickle cell, should be identified, and he even suggested they should have a compulsory visible mark.
What kind of mark?
Like a tattoo on the forehead.
A forehead tattoo. That's horrifying to modern ears.
It is. His logic, from his perspective, was purely about reducing suffering. If two carriers meet and they both see the mark, they won't fall in love, they won't have children, and the terrible disease will eventually die out.
He was thinking like a chemist.
He was thinking like a chemist, trying to stop a bad reaction from happening. He saw the molecular disease and wanted to stop the molecule from propagating. But it highlights this incredibly detached, clinical approach to human reproduction and ethics. He wasn't thinking like a humanist, considering the rights and dignity of the individual.
It's a powerful reminder that even our heroes can have views that seem incredibly authoritarian when viewed through a different lens.
Exactly. He was complex. He was also an outspoken atheist, which was not common for a public figure back then. He had a great witty line about the physicist Paul Dirac, who is another famous atheist. He said, "There is no God, and Dirac is his prophet."
That's good. I love that. So let's try to bring this all together. We have the boy professor, the architect of matter, the peacemaker, and the vitamin crusader.
Mhm.
What is the final takeaway from a life this sprawling?
I think the takeaway is about the power and the danger of absolute conviction. Pauling moved through his life with this unshakable certainty. When he was right, that certainty allowed him to rewrite textbooks and stop nuclear testing against massive, powerful opposition. He don't wait for permission or consensus.
But when he was wrong.
When he was wrong, that exact same certainty locked him into a battle he couldn't win, and it probably damaged his reputation in the medical field forever. But you have to ask yourself, would we have the Alpha Helix or the Test Ban Treaty if he had been a more hesitant, more self-doubting person?
Probably not. It takes a certain kind of ego, a certain kind of confidence, to tell the entire U.S. government they are wrong about bombs. And it's probably the same ego that lets you tell the entire Mayo Clinic they're wrong about cancer.
Exactly. You don't get the world-changing breakthroughs without the glaring blind spots. For Pauling, there were two sides of the very same coin.
Linus Pauling passed away in 1994, leaving behind a world that he literally helped save from nuclear fallout and a scientific landscape he helped build from the molecule up. Whether you're popping a vitamin C tablet today or just enjoying a world with a little less radiation in it, you are living in the world that Linus Pauling helped shape.
Well said.
So here's a final provocative thought to leave you with. Pauling was right about the chemical bond, right about the alpha helix, and right about nuclear fallout. He was wrong about the triple helix and, at least mostly, wrong about vitamin C. Does extreme genius require a certain blindness to being wrong, or was his later obstinacy just a tragic flaw in an otherwise brilliant mind?
Something to ponder.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.